biggest amount moment you've had on a date? Story 1. It was our fourth date. She brought up the ex's conversation, how many relationships have you been in, why didn't they work out, etc. Without skipping a beat, she told me she'd probably still be with her last partner, but he left because she lied about taking birth control. Story 2. Prior to the date, he told me he had a son. During the date, he casually mentioned he actually has 3 children, but 2 don't count, because their mom is a ETA. Some of y'all are doing some mental gymnastics to excuse this man. He meant what he said. I asked him to elaborate and he doubled down. Story 3. Attempted to rekindle a relationship because we bumped into each other at a happy hour and had a fun conversation and thought perhaps things ended prematurely. She was game for grabbing dinner and even suggested a good Italian place that she had been wanting to try. Done. Reservation booked. Time set. The day of our date arrived. We were supposed to meet there separately, but mid-morning she texted asking if she could get picked up. Sure, no problem. She texted again, this time asking if we could change the reservation time to an hour later in the evening. Okay, I'll see what I can do. Done. Another text. This time asking about possibly going to a different restaurant because one of her girlfriends suggested a better spot. I actually reserved a table at said better spot at the later time and everything. Oh, but then I found out that she didn't want the later time at the better spot. She wanted to go back to the original time. I forget exactly what my text message said at this point, but it was something along the line of, I'm sorry to do this, but I'm just not hungry anymore. Story 4. He asked me how much the bill was for his portion on our first date. I scan the bill and say, just put in 15 and it's fine. I'll get the rest. He grabbed the bill out of my hand and proceeded to explain to me the exact amount he owed for about 5 minutes, like I didn't understand basic math. Oh, and I'll throw in a bonus here. Another guy, first date. We met online, so it was our very first time meeting. Met at the restaurant, parked close, so our initial meeting was in the parking lot. He says hi, asks how the drive was, and then told me that if I didn't agree to him after dinner, he wasn't going to bother with the meal. I got right back in my car and left. Story 5. He said he was a bartender. We went to his apartment. He said he'd make me a drink. Then he put my drink in a different style glass than his. I asked to add something to it. I took a single sip, noticed he was watching me very intensely. I told him, try this, it's so good. He didn't swallow. I left. Story 6. I have 2 nightmare dating stories, but this one takes the cake. About 17 years ago, I dated a guy that I met off of Match. We had a good connection via messaging, phone calls, and we went on 4 dates. After the 4th date, there was a sudden change. He would take days to answer back, so I figured he was just busy and I just left him alone. After a while, he finally contacted me to go out on a 5th date and said, let's go to Venice Beach, as I have never been there before. When I was in the car with him, he never said a single word. He drove us out to Venice Beach, never made eye contact with me, and we were just in this weird, awkward silence the whole time. I would ask him what is wrong, what is on his mind, and if needs me to call for help. No answer. I knew something was bad. Of course, in my mind, I was running various scenarios in my head what my next move was. We went back to his car and he was taking me back home. Before we got close to my place, he let out a deep sigh and says, I have something to tell you. Of course, my insides were screaming at this point. He says, I don't deserve you. You have a lot to offer someone to make them happy, and I am not that person. He pauses, sighs again, and then says, you know why I was not responding early on? Because I was in mandatory anger management counseling and was having trouble coping with life. My eyes grew wide, and I asked what happened. He said his last girlfriend got on his nerves over something they argued about, and in turn, it frustrated him so much that he nearly choked her to death. Because of what occurred, he was in court-ordered counseling for the next few years and had to check in with someone 3 times a week. He felt he was ready to date again because he felt he mentally moved on to becoming a better person. By the time he pulled up to my house, he finished everything he was saying. He asks, what do you think I should do? What advice do you have for me? I told him calmly, I admire your courage to tell me the truth. I think the best move from this point is to remove your dating profile, finish your healing, rebuild yourself, and maybe try again when you feel ready. I said bye to him, went back in the house, and I literally just sat in my bed just in a weird stupor because I could not believe what happened, and thanking my stars that nothing happened to me. Strange but true, he actually did write me a final email thanking me for everything, and he did take down his profile a day later. Story 7. It was a blind date. Surprise! 2 of her friends just happened to show up. She invited them to join us without even asking me. They pretty much ignored me and ordered the most expensive items on the menu, including drinks. Every time I tried to join in the conversation, I was rudely dismissed. I realized pretty fast that I was being scammed. They barely paid attention when I finished my meal and excused myself to go to the restroom. I went to the bar and had the bartender call my server over. I was a regular there, so they knew me. I told her what was up and I wanted to pay my share of the check. I tipped her generously since I knew my date was probably going to screw her over. I warned my server that they might try to run out on the bill when they figured out I wasn't a sucker. I left and met some friends at a bar I knew they would be at. We had a good laugh about it. A few days later, I stopped back in the restaurant for lunch. The bartender told me I was right. He said it took them a while to catch on that I'd left. They did try to dine and dash and got caught. The manager threatened to call the cops. They ran up a huge tab because they had several drinks each as well. One of the girls had to have her dad come down and pay the bill. Story 8. I was on a first date with a young Mormon lady. We were in our mid-20s. She was telling me a little bit about her beliefs, about the 7 stages of heaven, and how most people can get to at least the first level of heaven. Then she started talking about sin, and how you can see deeper sins in the color of people's skin. That darker-skinned people have more inherent sin, so cannot go to heaven. But if they repent their sins, their skin will become pure and white, and then they can at least enter. As she was explaining this to me, her speech got slower and slower, you see, im Latino. Needless to say, we didn't make it to the first base of heaving. Story 9. First date. We drove past a cemetery and she said they are beautiful. I said, yeah, my father is buried in that one. She said, do you mind if we stop and visit his grave? This woman was stunningly beautiful, but a little quirky. I fumbled over my words for a few moments and reluctantly said, I guess so. I was weirded out, but curious where it could possibly go from there. This was within the first hour of the date. We are standing there, and she pulls me close. I feel her breath on my neck. I am still wondering if someone is about to tase me and steal my organs. All of a sudden, she says, let's take a picture to remember this moment. It was weird, but we move on. The next day, she posts pictures all over social media of us with my father's headstone. It was super creepy. I called and messaged her to please take it down. I felt so violated. She did not understand my reaction, and truthfully, neither did I. I just got an ick about her. Story 10. He asked me to go to a movie, then pulled up in Crocs and PJs. Said we were going to go to his house instead of the movie theater. Then proceeded to tell me he doesn't actually have his driver's license. Story 11. I'm a gay guy. Had a date with a guy that seemed okay until the end of the night when he told me he had just come out to his family during his sister's wedding that caused a bunch of drama. No thanks. If you aren't mature enough to realize that this is your sister's special day and that you made it all about you, then this ain't gonna work. Story 12. We went to a movie, and as we got up, she threw the popcorn on the floor, flipped the bag and gave it a good shake. I said that wasn't nice, and she said they have people to clean up. I wish I had said something else, but I sorta just went on autopilot until I dropped her off. Story 13. Buddy of mine wanted to get in the game but is super cheap, so he was using Plenty of Fish. Mistake 1. Connects with a chick who seemed down to clown, so he mistake 2 invited her to his house. She immediately is upset that he doesn't have Tito's vodka, and that's the only thing she drinks. So she insists they go to the liquor store and get some. Now my buddy is 50-50 that he's gonna get robbed, but the other 50 is a good chance of getting laid. So he compromises by telling her to drive and leaves his wallet behind. They get into her car, and there's no seat in the passenger side. She says she has a huge dog, so she took the seat out and just sit in the back. And they head off to the liquor store. During the drive, he comes to the understanding that this woman is drunk. He's still holding out for the possibility, though. They get to the liquor store, and it's too late, closed. The chick says, I know a store there open late, but the liquor stores are all state stores. They all have the same hours. She insists she knows a place, and he's captive in the back seat. She gets on the interstate, and a while goes by in silence, and he eventually asked, where are we going? And she screams in terror. She'd forgotten he was in the back seat. She tells him they're going to the liquor store in a city 30 minutes away. Now he's almost given up on the failing hope of getting some strange and just wants to live. Asks if they can just go home, and she screams again. Forgot he was in the car again. So he tried to keep a full conversation going to keep her awake and aware of him, and they eventually get to the destination magic open liquor store. It was closed. She insists it's open and goes to the door and starts pounding on it. Now comes the peanut gallery. Some Mexican guys are sitting in a truck drinking beers and yell at her that's closed. You want a beer? And she starts yelling racial slurs at them, and not even the right ones for Mexicans. Now 3 Mexicans and a drunk high bipolar chick are trading profanities, and my buddy finally reached chance 0 point and just walked away. Turned around the corner and sat down at a bus stop and called me. It's like 100 a.m. on a work night, and I see the call and like, this can't be good. So I drive to get him. He tells me this whole long story that I honestly can't remember half of. It was much worse. Then we drank at his place until dawn and called in sick to work. Story 14. When he asked me if I thought he smelled nice, I politely said yes, and he reached into his leather jacket and brought out a little sample atomizer of Ferrari cologne. He proudly presented it to me, saying I could keep it as a memento of our date and him. In the right way, it could be rather kitschy and cute, but this guy was fully into himself all night, and this was the cherry on top. He was shocked when I didn't want to go home with him that night, ha 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 ha. Story 15. When he wouldn't get out of my truck until I kissed him. I threatened to drive to the police station to get him out of my truck. Spoiler alert, there wasn't a second date. Story 16. He kept telling me how much I reminded him of his daughter while he kept trying to grab my face to try to go for a kiss. When he went to the bathroom, I ran out. Story 17. Online dating will change you. I have stories where I noped in person, but the wildest by a mile was when I figured out the full name of who I was chatting with and did a Google search. The top result was a news story about how she cheated on her while he was in their house. A confrontation ensued, and said was killed by her new lover, their friend. Funniest part, we matched online only 7 months after the published article. He asked me how many other guys I was talking to, and when I said no one else, he said, "Fine, lie to me if you want." Talking to 7 other girls. It's kind of a slow week for me because it's usually like 15-20 LOL. I laughed because I thought he was joking, and that pissed him off even more. He told me he could have anyone he wanted, and he left. Story 18. After taking me to dinner, came inside when dropping me off. Once inside, asked, "Do you want a FK?" When I, totally shocked, politely declined, he whipped it out and jerked off in front of me. First date, last date. Edit, this was in 1996 and I was 24 years old. Totally different times. No one would have considered it SA, but still definitely weird and gross. I wasn't asked out by him again. Second edit. No, of course it was not Louis C.K., but funny coincidence, his name was Lou. Story 19. When he said he traveled to Africa often for work. I lived in Africa for a bit and initially loved this. It was something we had in common. Until he said he doesn't think people in rural villages in Africa should have access to clean water or electricity because someone has to pay for it. After back and forth for a bit, I got up and left. Story 20. So when I was 21 years old, we went to the movies for our first date. We were watching The Hobbit, Desolation of Smaug. Everything was great until about an HR into the movie. He started rubbing my belly. I was plus-sized, so I had a little stomach like I was a freaking Buddha or a magic lamp, and he was wanting a genie to pop out to make 3 wishes for him. I asked him to stop and that it was weird. Then about 15 minutes later, he leaned over and said, "I can't wait to put a baby into your belly." I said, excuse me? We just met, and I don't know anything about you." I got up and left the theater without him. There were just too many red flags that were too creepy for my liking. A few years later, a new friend ended up going on a few dates with the same guy. He ended up putting a tracker on her car and stalking her. I'm glad I followed my instincts. I only met her a couple weeks after her mechanic found the tracker. Story 21. Definitely the time a guy took me to see some Silence of the Lambs sequel. Was that a thing? And laughed through all the disturbing parts. Then he told me how he'd looked into hiring someone to kill his ex-girlfriend who'd cheated on him but decided against it because he didn't want to leave her sons without a mom. We were at the beach after the movie when he told me this. And then he followed up with, "Do you know the best way to hide a body? You go out as far as you can at low tide and dig a hole. So that way, when the tide comes back in, sand keeps getting pushed on top of the body." He was dumb, and this clearly wouldn't work, but the fact that he took pride in almost hiring a hitman and would brag about a stupid way to hide a body was like, oh, no. He was in the Navy, no more military for me, and shipped out the next day or the day after, so I never had to see him again. Story 22. So this is embarrassing in retrospect. Back in my second year of college, I was pulling an all-nighter at the same time as this very cute girl who I was friends with. We weren't in the same place, but we kept messaging over Facebook or Hangouts or what have you the entire night. It was really nice just talking with her. I had been single for about 2 months and was just getting over the breakup. When dawn hit and our papers were finally done, she asked me out for celebratory breakfast. I went looking kind of gross. I absolutely looked like I had just finished an all-nighter. She looked radiant and had clearly put more work into this meeting than I did. As our breakfast went on, we're talking, laughing, and the caffeine is mixing with the satisfaction of completing my work for the semester. And I just feel like I'm in a really good place, and I tell her as much. The sun is starting to fill the windows of the restaurant we're in, and there's this warm light everywhere. She smiles, looks coy, and asks me if I'm over my ex. I smile back, say that I am, and tell her that I'm already thinking of the person who would like to ask out next. She smiles even broader and asks me if she knows who it is, while touching me on the hand. Still smiling, I say, "I don't think so. Her name is Rebecca, and she was in one of my history classes." Distinctly, this was not the girl I was out to breakfast with. The girl I was with looked absolutely devastated, and I had no idea why. I think I said something like, "I'm sad the semester's ending soon, but I'll see you in the spring." and thus ended what I would later learn was the first date with the woman who would later become my wife. Story 23. We had a pleasant first date, so we arranged for a second. I was waiting for him in the pub and he was running late, so I text, "Where are you?" And he sent me a voice note screaming, "Where am I? Where the am I? Am outside the pub, waiting for you. How dare you speak to me like that? You. Am leaving." I was like, fair enough, and proceeded to have drinks with other people. Then a week later, he asked if we could go on another date. Went on a dinner date at a guy's house. He surprised me and had invited his parents over, and that was awkward enough. Then, in the middle of dinner, he got down on one knee and proposed. It was our first date. I just got up and walked out. Thank God I had driven there. At that point, I would have walked home if I had to, though. Story 24. Before we actually went on the date, we were still chatting online. She dropped the fact that she lets her dog lick her vagina. I didn't ask her what her favorite thing is or what is the kinkiest thing she ever did was. It was straight out of the blue. Story 25. She was heart-stoppingly beautiful, and I had no chance, but you miss every shot you don't take. I invited her out for coffee, and I could see her realize, and then to my surprise, instead of gently turning me down, she countered with accompanying her to her book club. Holy. She didn't say no, and I love books too. This is perfect. When I showed up, they were unironically reading a Christian scientific refutation of evolution. She was so beautiful and kind, I sat and considered for a moment if I could deal with all the potential baggage that book suggested. Then I thanked her very kindly for inviting me, and told her we could be friends, but it wasn't going to work out. Story 26. After introducing herself, she immediately said that she was boring, didn't get out much, and speaks fluent sarcasm. She then said she works too much and doesn't have much time to devote to a relationship. I was livid at the person who set us up. Story 27. She showed up wearing a dirty white crop top and started playing with her exposed belly button in the middle of our dinner date, and then proceeded to say out loud with people surrounding us, "You, what the is that in my belly button?" Story 28. He revealed to me hadn't bothered to mention before we'd met up that he had 2 children by 2 different women. Also lied about his height by a lot. Edit forgot to mention that he referred to his children as accidents. LOL. Story 29. First date. Starbucks was closing and he asked me if I wanted to continue the conversation in his truck. I happily agreed. As soon as we got in, he turned the truck on and took off down the highway. He said he'd take me back when I proved to him what my mouth could do while whipping out his penis. Basically got kidnapped on the first date. Oh yeah. And he was a middle school resource officer. Story 30. F43. I was maybe 37 to 38 years old and having lunch with a dating candidate, and was reprimanded like a 5-year-old because I didn't change the knife to my right hand while cutting in a piece of meat. I finished that bite, I placed the silverware on top of the plate, grabbed my purse and left. Story 31. First date, we got sushi and went to a movie. 20 minutes into the movies, he grabs my hand, so I'm like, okay, this is fine, I guess. And then, a few minutes later, he proceeds to start rubbing on my thighs. I got up and went outside and told him my sister was having an emergency and needed me to come over as quickly as possible. He walked me out and tried to kiss me, and I leaned my forehead into the kiss and hopped in my car and sped off so quickly. Blocked, never spoke again. To this day, I refuse to watch Aquaman. Story 32. Not a date, but rather a girl I was hooking up with at a party, and it's kinda long, but I just think the whole thing was so weird it's worth sharing. We were in her kitchen and we begin to make out, and suddenly she starts talking about how her best friend is totally in love with her, but she keeps kissing me while saying so. Then she elaborates by saying, "Yeah, my best friend is outside in the party," and I'm like, "Whoa, well, should we stop?" She goes, "No," and I'm kinda uncomfortable anyways because I've been the best friend and I kinda wanna stop. She goes, "No, it's totally fine," and then keeps going on about it, like really going into detail, and tells me the whole story about how she liked him, but then she didn't, and I'm like, okay. And before I can decide what to do, the best friend walks into the kitchen. He goes, "I'm sorry," and then walks out. Normal, uncomfortable situation, right? Well, this happens at least 3 times. Like, he keeps walking in and going, "Sorry, dude is clearly drunk at this point," so the 3rd time, I'm like, "Nah, dude, you guys clearly need to talk. I'll just be outside, you figure out stuff." And the girl holds my hand and makes me stay, but then starts talking to him and like, she wants me to be a 3rd neutral party or something. She begins to tell him that she didn't like when he did so, and she asked me, "What do you think?" while holding my arm tightly and not letting me go. I said it, and just end up playing along and actively listening to them and trying to help them. I'm a teacher, so I guess I'm good at that. Long story short, I managed to get out of that situation eventually. We go outside and a few hours later people start leaving. So I go back to her apartment to grab my stuff. Of course, she comes back with me and now we're all alone in the apartment. We go back to the kitchen and things start getting hot again when suddenly we hear a knock on the door. And guess whose voice we hear outside? Yeah, of course. her best friend. So I'm like, okay, yeah, no, that's it, bye. And as I'm about to leave, she stomps her feet on top of the couch, putting her leg between me and the door, and asks me, so what are we? And I'm like, nothing. We just kissed. And listen, I'm sorry. I just went through a breakup, so I'm not really looking for anything more than that right now. Sorry if that disappoints you, and that was true, but also I didn't want to get into that whole mess at all. She goes, but can we still mess around some more? And before I can say anything, the best friend knocks again, so we open the door and he is there. And then he says, sorry again, and I say, chill. Leaving anyways. And before I can go down the stairs, the girl calls me up and goes, my friend is too drunk. Can you make sure he gets home safe? And since I can't for the life of me say no to that, I end up in a cab with him 5 minutes later. During the trip, he starts telling me how much he loves her, but that she hurt him and so on and so on. And I can totally understand the guy because, again, I've been in his position. But at this point, I just want to get home and forget about the whole mess. But I have to make sure he gets home safe, so we stop in front of his house. And as he is about to leave, he turns around and says, please take good care of her. She is happier with you. He gets off the car and walks off into the night. A month goes by, and I see both the girl and her best friend walking down the street holding hands as a couple. Yup. Story 33. He was half an hour late, clearly intoxicated or on some kind of drug, tried kissing me multiple times even though I told him to stop, and then slapped me in front of all these people in a pub. I didn't go on dates for a while after that. Story 34. First date, she started going on and on about her past lives, no BSing. She really believed this from independent verification I got later from a mutual acquaintance, and how she had been Joan of Arc, Marie Antoinette, and some other famous people as well. I just sat there wondering how the do I get the F out of here and as fast as possible. She droned on, and me not wanting to be rude, I listened and laughed half-heartedly when she did. Yet while I was listening, what I really wanted to ask was, since you were Marie Antoinette, what did it feel like to have your head cut off by a guillotine? Or, how did it feel to be burned at the stake? Etc. To say there was no second date is a given. Why is it that past lives people are always somebody famous, not Bob the garbage boy? Story 35. Third date. Had a picnic in the park by his apartment. All signs were positive, great conversation, shared interests, good vibes. He invited me back to his to watch a movie, and before the movie started, I popped into his bathroom to freshen up. The bathroom was beyond gross for a single guy living alone. The toilet was black with mold, and the room smelled like pee. The shower had no curtain and there were black streaks down the tile. There was shaving debris and tiny hairs all over the sink and no soap to be found. I literally gagged, faked a stomach ache and left. There was no fourth date. Still not sure how someone could live like that, especially since the rest of the apartment appeared tidy clean. Story 36. Met online. Agreed to meet up in person at a bar. He arrived looking 20 years older than his pictures, wearing loose-fitting khaki dad pants, a button-down shirt, and socks with sandals. He asked if I wanted to play shuffleboard. Painting a picture. Not long after I arrived, a woman and a different man joined us at our table. After being introduced to the couple, they seem more interested in visiting with me than my date does. Within a few minutes, the reveal that my date is her husband and the other guy is her boyfriend. Seems they were looking for a fourth. I'm not anti-polyamory, but this was never mentioned nor discussed. And my date's wife looked so young, she could easily have been a kidnapping victim with Stockholm Syndrome. The entire interaction was wrought with red flags. And my date didn't have a personality. Can't imagine how he's managed to land this teenaged wife. Needless to say, I left soon after. No thank you. Story 37. She was racist. To non-whites. I am non-white. My name is obviously non-European origin Pakistani. She said I was okay since I seemed nice and was light-skinned. I did complete the meal and paid for it. Apparently, white passing privilege means being able to date racist white ladies. ETA, in case you're wondering, it wasn't our first date. It was our last. Story 38. Mentioned moving across the country in exactly 405 days. Did some quick mental math and realized it's the day her son turns 18. Left as soon as I got a to-go box. I only have room for one woman who hates her kids in my life. Story 39. He was a widowed high school principal who had recently quit his job. And when I asked why he quit, he said he actually was asked to resign because he had punched out a student who had talked back to him. Another guy I went on one blind date with told me he was recently divorced because his wife left him after he was arrested for solicitation of prostitution. Story 40. Oh, there have been some. All these were on first dates. Guy was giving me a tour and showed me his bondage room with eye bolts on the ceiling floor. Guy told me about how a partner stabbed him and he married her because he was afraid. Guy told me about his recent domestic violence conviction. It would be wise to say those were the only dates with those men, but they were not. Only date I immediately walked away from was the guy who stuck his tongue in my ear canal like a dog trying to get a PB out of a jar. That was a bridge too far. Story 41. He owned several car lots, and he sold my car for me. He asked me to dinner. Everything was great. He asked if I wanted to see the house he'd just bought on his credit card. It was still early out and the house was only a few blocks away. The real estate agent was there and he wanted to sign some papers, so I agreed. It was a modest little brick house, super cute, and he had indeed bought it. He used his credit card for the down payment, and he was signing some documents for the finalizing of the sale, etc. I was pretty impressed, I admit. Then he dragged his finger along a dusty ledge and said, "Needs a woman's touch," and I noped right the heck out of there. Big bucks or not, I am nobody's servant. Never saw him again. Story 42. Went to Mardi Gras with a guy, and back to his apartment after. His apartment was a pigsty, a bachelor pad almost. Immediate no. We had been dating for a bit, and I could tell I would be the one cleaning that eventually down the line. Story 43. First date with my now husband. We are both very anxious people who had little experience with dating, and we were both so nervous. I threw up right before the date. He came to pick me up and we drove to the library where we were planning to use their Wi-Fi to watch Netflix in the back of the car. Despite being almost 20 years old, my mom would not let us hang out in my bedroom at home. As soon as we got to the library, he got out of the car and threw up in the parking lot. I then admitted to him that I had also thrown up right before the date. He tried to play it off as us having the flu or food poisoning, but we both knew it was really just the nerves. Story 44. First date at a modest little bar. He opens his bag and pulls out a beer that he bought at a supermarket. He knew which beer they sold at the bar, so he bought the same brand. He brought 3 beers in total. He was too cheap to even pay for one beer at the bar he frequented several times a week. No one is cute enough to make up for that. Story 45. My date was talking about him and his ex having a fight, and he pinned her up against a wall by her throat. His exact words were, "If a woman wants to start, you'll finish it. No thanks." Didn't stop him from lying and saying him before he dropped me, but if it spares me from that nonsense, then so be it. Story 46. Went mini golfing where they had an ice cream shop attached. He emptied his milkshake cup and peed in it while sitting at a picnic table. The ice cream shop had public bathrooms. Another guy looked exactly like Claude from Original Degrassi. He wore a vest and insisted on doing magic tricks during the entire date. Certainly made me disappear. Story 47. I told him that I wasn't religious, but I respect those who are, as long as they don't push anything on me. He said he's respectful of those who aren't religious, but that I should just remember that the gospel will save my soul. I got up and left LOL. Story 48. We went for a walk and there was a crossing. She asked me which way we should take. I said I don't care. I am just enjoying our walk. Afterwards, she told me that was the moment she knew I am not the one, because she needs a man who can make tough decisions. Story 49. First thing she said when she showed up late, it was like 5 minutes late, so no biggie. Sorry, I'm late. Mexicans took forever trimming my hedges, and I didn't trust them around my home when I was gone. Now, I'm not Mexican, nor a minority, but holy. I just told her, well, that's racist, and dipped out, and dipped. Luckily, it was at a brewery where you go to the counter and pay for a beer each time, no tabs, so I didn't have to worry about waiting for a check. First date with a girl. She ordered lobster macaroni and cheese and picked out all the lobster. Story 50. Met online and had been chatting a bit. Texting as I am headed to meet up for the first date. Him, can you pick me up? I'm not mobile at the moment. Me, sure. What's the address? Him, do you think you could loan me a little money until next week? Me, bye. Literal conversation. No response after that. I didn't even make it out the door. Story 51. I offered him apple scorla carbonated water and apple juice mix, and he refused because apple juice is for children and he is not a child. Bro, who hurt you?